A 90-year-old veteran, bullied and harassed by a group of bikers, takes matters into her own hands. What happens next will leave you stunned. When these bikers think they can intimidate her, they have no idea who they're really dealing with. After being pushed to the brink, this tough, seasoned veteran makes a phone call that changes everything. What unfolds next is so unexpected. It will blow your mind. You won't believe what happens when the world underestimates this woman. Watch until the end, and you'll be shocked by what she does next. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible new stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. In the peaceful town of Riverstone, Virginia, a 90-year-old woman was about to teach a ruthless motorcycle gang a lesson they would never forget. Margaret Peggy Thompson seemed like any other elderly resident, until the day a notorious gang called the Shadow Vipers made the mistake of harassing her at a local gas station. What they didn't know was that Peggy wasn't just a kind grandmother. She was one of Vietnam's most decorated helicopter pilots, having completed over 200 successful rescue missions behind enemy lines. When their intimidation crossed a line, Peggy made a single phone call that would change everything. The Shadow Vipers, led by the menacing Havoc, thought they were dealing with an easy target. Instead, they found themselves face to face with over 50 combat-hardened veteran bikers, men whose lives Peggy had saved decades ago in the jungles of Vietnam. What began as a day of bullying quickly escalated into a dramatic confrontation that would forever alter the town of Riverstone. The quiet morning was broken as Peggy drove to Mike's Gas and Go, a station she had frequented for years. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her posture remained remarkably straight from years of military service. As she parked her old Ford Taurus, the young attendant Jimmy greeted her with a smile. "The usual today?" he asked, his voice friendly. "Just a full tank," Peggy replied, her movements deliberate, showcasing the discipline she had carried with her for decades. As the scent of gasoline filled the air, her mind drifted to the V8 meetings she needed to attend later. These meetings weren't just routine. They connected her with old friends and comrades who understood the value of service. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere shattered. The distant roar of motorcycles grew louder and closer, soon overtaking the sound of her own engine. 5 motorcycles, then 10, then 15, rolled into the lot, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. The Shadow Vipers had arrived. Peggy didn't flinch. Her military training took over as she assessed the situation from the reflection in her car window, calmly taking stock of the potential threat. The leader, a man known as Havoc, dismounted his bike with practiced arrogance. His leather vest was adorned with patches that spoke of violence and intimidation. His eyes were cold as they locked onto Peggy. "Well, what do we have here?" Havoc called, his voice dripping with mockery. "Grandma's out for a morning drive." Peggy continued to fill her gas tank, her expression unreadable. She had faced much worse before. The jungles of Vietnam had taught her that real danger didn't announce itself in such a loud, brash way. "Just getting gas," she replied, her voice even. No need for any trouble. One of the gang members, a tall man with a scraggly beard, approached and noticed the glint of her license plate holder. "Hey, Havoc, check this out," he sneered. "Vietnam veteran. You hear that?" The old lady claimed she's a vet. Havoc's laughter rang out, sharp and mocking. "A woman veteran? What did you do in Nam, sweetheart? Serve coffee to the real soldiers." His words struck deep, but Peggy's face remained composed. They had no idea about the countless nights she had spent flying through enemy fire, the soldiers she had pulled from certain death. The medals that sat quietly in a box at home seemed irrelevant now. "I serve my country," she said simply, replacing the gas pump. Havoc stepped closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "Served your country? Let me tell you something, old woman. The only thing you've served is dinner. The gang spread out, encircling her car, but Peggy remained unfazed. Inside the station, Jimmy had vanished, his face pale as he probably dialed 911. Peggy knew the police wouldn't make it in time to stop anything. "You should move along," Peggy said, her voice steady. "This isn't your kind of place anymore." Havoc sneered. "The Shadow Vipers own Riverstone now." Peggy straightened her back, eyes meeting his with unwavering confidence. "Young man, I've faced things that would make your gang cry for their mothers." She started to open her car door, but one of the men slammed it shut with a resounding bang. Her heart rate remained steady, unshaken by the sound. She had heard gunshots and felt explosions, but this was nothing. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly," Havoc growled, leaning in close, his breath hot against her face. "This is our town now. You show respect." Peggy met his gaze without flinching. "Respect is earned, son. And so far, all I see are boys playing at being men." The words hung in the air. Then, with a twisted grimace, Havoc grabbed Peggy's arm with brutal force. "You want to learn about respect? We'll teach you," as his grip tightened. Peggy's mind flashed back to 1968, a night she had pulled a young soldier from a burning helicopter wreck. That soldier, Jack Morrison, had grown up to be Colonel Jack, Iron Jack Morrison, leader of the largest veteran motorcycle club in the state. He had once told her, "If you ever need anything, Peggy, anything at all, you just call." She hadn't needed to call in all these years, but looking at Havoc's cruel eyes, she knew that moment had come. The Shadow Vipers had no idea what they had just started, but they were about to learn the true meaning of strength, courage, and respect. Thanks to Peggy's phone call, Havoc's grip tightened, but Peggy didn't waver. "Take your hand off me," she said, her voice sharp and commanding, as though she were still directing helicopter crews through enemy fire. For a moment, Havoc hesitated. His fingers loosened, but his expression remained menacing. "You think you can stop us, old woman?" he sneered. "I don't make threats," Peggy replied coolly, slipping into her car. "I never have. But I promise you, son, you're making a mistake." One of the other gang members laughed. "Hear that, Havoc? The old lady's making promises." Peggy didn't respond. She slid behind the wheel, her movements controlled, deliberate. Through the windshield, she could see Jimmy inside the station, his face tight with worry. The police wouldn't be much help. The Shadow Vipers had terrorized Riverstone for months, and local law enforcement had done little to stop them. Havoc placed his hand on her car hood. "You're not going anywhere," he declared. "Not until we teach you some respect." Peggy's engine rumbled to life, the familiar sound bringing a sense of calm. She glanced at Havoc through the windshield. "Let me tell you something," she said, her voice low and firm. "You're about to find out what real respect is." "Respect," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I earned mine pulling men twice your size out of burning helicopters, with bullets flying past my head. What have you done, other than terrorize innocent people?" Her words hit their mark. Havoc's face darkened, and with a silent signal, his gang surrounded her car, their motorcycles blocking her escape from every direction. "Get out of the car," Havoc demanded, his voice low and threatening. Instead of complying, Peggy reached for her phone. The motion made several gang members tense up, expecting a call to the police. But Peggy wasn't calling the authorities. Not yet. "You want to see what real respect looks like?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "Just wait," Havoc laughed, the sound echoing off the gas station's metal roof. "Oh, I get it. You're calling for help. Maybe your grandkids, or the cops. Go ahead, call whoever you want. We'll still be here." As Havoc's laughter rang out, Peggy's mind flashed back to a harrowing night in Vietnam. The rain had been pouring in sheets, visibility near zero, but she'd heard the distress call. A squad was pinned down, taking heavy fire. Among them was a young lieutenant named Jack Morrison. Peggy had flown in blind, using nothing but instinct and skill, and pulled them all out alive. "You boys ever hear of the Veterans Guard?" she asked, her finger pressing the first number on her phone. Several of the gang members shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the name. The Veterans Guard was a well-known motorcycle club in biker circles, a group made up entirely of combat veterans, led by the legendary Iron Jack Morrison. They weren't just any gang. They were disciplined, organized, and commanded respect even from the hardest outlaws. "What's that got to do with anything?" Snake Tattoo asked, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "Now everything," Peggy replied simply, continuing to dial. "You see, back in '68, there was this young lieutenant. His chopper went down deep in enemy territory. Everyone said it was a suicide mission to go after him, but I went anyway." The phone began to ring. Havoc's expression flickered between anger and confusion. "That lieutenant," Peggy's voice carried, filling the suddenly quiet lot. "His name was Jack Morrison. These days, people call him Iron Jack. And he owes me a favor." The phone connected. A gruff voice answered. "Morrison? Jack, it's Peggy Thompson. Remember that night near Quezon?" There was a pause. Then Iron Jack's voice softened with recognition. "Peggy, of course I remember. I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for you. What's wrong?" Peggy's eyes locked with Havoc's as she spoke. "I've got some young men here who need a lesson in respect. The Shadow Vipers. They seem to think Riverstone belongs to them now." The change in Iron Jack's voice was immediate. It turned to steel. "Where are you?" "Mike's gas and go. Take your time coming over. These boys aren't going anywhere," Peggy replied, ending the call. The atmosphere in the lot shifted. Several of the gang members exchanged nervous glances. The Shadow Vipers might rule Riverstone through fear, but the Veterans Guard was something else entirely. Havoc tried to maintain his composure, but Peggy could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "You're bluffing," he growled. "Iron Jack wouldn't come running just because some old woman called you." "Sure about that?" Peggy asked, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Want to stick around and find out?" In the distance, the unmistakable rumble of approaching motorcycles began to fill the air. It wasn't the chaotic roar of the Shadow Vipers' bikes. This was different, synchronized, disciplined. Havoc's face paled slightly as the sound grew louder. "Mount up," he barked to his gang, trying to regain control. "We're not done here, old woman. Not by a long shot." The Shadow Vipers scrambled onto their bikes, engines roaring to life as they peeled out of the lot. Havoc pointed a trembling finger at Peggy. "This isn't over. You've just made things worse for yourself." Peggy watched them go, her expression calm. She knew they'd be back. Bullies always came back. But now, the rules had changed. As the sound of the Veterans Guard grew closer, she allowed herself a small smile. The Shadow Vipers were about to learn what real strength looked like. And the lesson was just beginning. The morning sun had risen higher, burning away the last traces of dawn. Peggy could see the first bikes of the Veterans Guard appearing on the horizon, their chrome gleaming like armor. The real story was about to begin. The Veterans Guard arrived like thunder, their bikes moving in perfect formation as they poured into the gas station lot. 50 riders strong, each one a combat veteran. Their leather vests were adorned with military patches and unit insignias. At their head rode Colonel Jack, Iron Jack Morrison. His silver hair caught the morning light, and his presence commanded respect without a word being spoken. Jimmy, the gas station attendant, watched wide-eyed from behind the glass as the veterans filled the lot. These weren't the chaotic, undisciplined riders he was used to seeing. These men moved with military precision, their bikes arranging themselves in a defensive perimeter around Peggy's car. Iron Jack dismounted first, removing his helmet to reveal a weathered face marked by time and experience. His eyes, as sharp as ever, immediately found Peggy. A smile broke through his stern expression as he approached her. "Been a long time, Captain Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of shared history. "Too long," Peggy replied, straightening instinctively. Old habits died hard, though she wished the reunion were under better circumstances. Iron Jack's expression hardened as he glanced in the direction the Shadow Vipers had fled. "Tell me everything." As Peggy recounted the morning's events, more veterans gathered around, their faces growing darker with each detail. These men understood respect. They'd earned it the hard way, in jungles and deserts, watching their brothers fall and rise together. The Shadow Vipers, one of the veterans spat. They've been causing trouble up and down the coast. It's time someone taught them a lesson. Iron Jack raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "Peggy here taught me something important back in '68. You remember what you told me that night, Captain, when everyone else said the mission was impossible?" Peggy smiled slightly. "I told you that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified." "That's right," Jack nodded. "And you showed us what that meant when you flew into that hot zone. Lost count of how many rounds hit your chopper that night." One of the younger veterans stepped forward, his eyes wide with recognition. "Wait, this is the Angel of Kazan? The pilot who saved the entire 5th Platoon." "The one and only," Jack confirmed, though Peggy never did like that nickname. She waved it off. "There were dozens of pilots braver than me. I just did what needed doing." "Just did what needed doing," Jack echoed with a laugh. "She says that like it was nothing. Boys, this woman flew into the teeth of enemy fire more times than anyone could count. Saved my life and the lives of countless others. And now some punk gang thinks they can intimidate her." The veteran faces hardened with resolve. These men understood debt, loyalty, and honor. Each of them had served, known the terror of combat, and the brotherhood that forged them. "The Shadow Vipers will be back," Peggy said, her voice steady. "Let them come," Jack replied grimly. "But first, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Tell me about their leader, this Havoc." As Peggy described the gang leader, Iron Jack's expression grew increasingly concerned. He recognized the danger. Peggy Thompson's 89 years of life had been anything but ordinary. This morning had begun like any other, yet she found herself at the center of a brewing storm. The Shadow Vipers, a gang that had ruled Riverstone with an iron fist for months, had picked the wrong person to intimidate. She'd faced fear before. In the jungles of Vietnam, in the skies over hostile territory, and she learned that fear, unlike respect, could be overcome. But respect? That had to be earned. Inside Mike's gas and go, the air still held the acrid tang of the gang's exhaust. Jimmy, the gas station's nervous young attendant, stood nearby. His hand shook slightly, but his voice carried a hint of courage as he finally spoke. "They've been terrorizing Riverstone for months. The police either can't or won't do anything about it." Peggy's old friend, Iron Jack Morrison, a man whose commanding presence was forged in combat, nodded thoughtfully as he formulated a plan. "Peggy," he said, "don't you have a VA meeting to attend?" "Yes," she replied hesitantly, "but under the circumstances." "You'll attend," Jack interrupted, his smile calm but his eyes sharp with determination. "Just like any other day. But you won't be going alone." Jack turned to his men, his voice taking on the same authoritative tone that had once led them through battle. "Alpha Team, you're on escort duty. Beta and Charlie teams, start patrols. I want eyes on every corner of Riverstone. If the Shadow Vipers want to play games, let's show them how veterans handle business." The Veterans Guard moved with practiced precision, breaking into their assigned groups. Their bikes roared to life, and Jack turned back to Peggy, his voice softening. "We'll handle this, Captain. The old way." Peggy looked at the assembled group, men who understood sacrifice and honor in ways the Shadow Vipers never could. "Just try not to destroy the town in the process, Jack. Riverstone's been my home for 40 years. Jack grinned, but his expression grew serious. "No promises. But these boys need to learn that respect isn't taken. It's earned. And they're about to get one hell of a lesson." The convoy left the gas station with a display of power and discipline. The veterans' formation was a stark contrast to the chaotic, menacing presence of the Shadow Vipers. As the engines faded into the distance, Jimmy stood watching, a small smile on his face. For the first time in months, it felt like things might actually change in Riverstone. Across town, in an abandoned warehouse that served as the Shadow Vipers' clubhouse, Havoc paced the oil-stained floor. His boots echoed against the concrete as his gang watched nervously. The morning's encounter had shaken their usual bravado, though none would admit it openly. "The Veterans Guard?" Havoc muttered, kicking an empty beer can across the floor. "That old woman knows Iron Jack Morrison. Of all the people in this worthless town, we had to pick her." Snake Tattoo, leaning against his bike, tried to maintain his tough exterior. "So what? They're just another MC. We've dealt with rival clubs before." Diesel, one of the older members, shook his head. "No, these guys are different. They're not just bikers. They're combat vets. Organized, disciplined. They've seen real war. We've seen plenty of action," Havoc growled, but there was an edge of doubt in his voice. "Not like them," Diesel insisted. "I've heard stories about Iron Jack. He runs the Veterans Guard like a military unit. And that woman, if she really is the pilot they call the Angel of Kusan, I don't care if she's the Queen of England." Havoc exploded, slamming his fist into a nearby locker. "This is our town now. We can't let some old woman and her veteran friends push us around. We'll lose everything we've built here." Meanwhile, Peggy's convoy arrived at the VA Center. The Veterans Guard's bikes formed a protective perimeter around the parking lot as Peggy stepped out of her car. Several veterans who had been waiting for the meeting came out to greet her, their eyes wide at the impressive escort. "Quite an entrance," remarked Sarah Chun, a Gulf War veteran who ran the VA support group. Peggy smiled, straightening her cardigan. "Word travels fast. Hard to miss 50 Veterans Guard bikes rolling through town," Sarah replied. "Want to tell us what happened?" Inside, the meeting began. Peggy shared the morning's events with the packed room. Veterans of all ages, from Vietnam to recent conflicts, listened intently. Their reactions ranged from anger to grim determination. "I remembered something this morning," Peggy said, her voice steady. "Something from my last mission in Vietnam. We were pulling out a group of Marines under heavy fire. The helicopter was taking hits, hydraulics failing, but we couldn't leave those boys behind." The room was silent as everyone leaned in, even the Veterans Guard members stationed outside. One of the young Marines asked me later why I came back for them when everyone else said it was too risky. I told him something I've never forgotten. Sometimes the biggest act of courage is standing up for others when everyone else looks away. Iron Jack, standing at the back, nodded. "That's what we're doing now, Peggy. Standing up for Riverstone." Before anyone could respond, the distant roar of motorcycles filled the air. Through the windows, clouds of dust rose from the road leading to the VA Center. The Shadow Vipers were returning, and they'd brought reinforcements. "Looks like Havoc called in some friends," Jack observed grimly. "At least 30 more riders." Peggy stood, her movement commanding every eye in the room. "Jack, I won't have violence at the VA Center. These people come here for healing, not fighting." "Agreed," Jack replied, already moving toward the door. "Delta Team, escort our veterans out the back entrance. Everyone else mount up. We're taking this somewhere else." The Veterans Guard moved with tactical precision, helping attendees to safety while preparing for confrontation. Outside, the Shadow Vipers and their reinforcements lined up across the street, their bikes forming an intimidating wall of chrome and steel. Havoc sat at the center, his face twisted with anger and wounded pride. "Come on out, old woman," he shouted. "You and your veteran friends can't hide in there forever." Iron Jack stepped out first, commanding attention. Behind him, the Veterans Guard took positions, their formation precise and unyielding. Peggy emerged last, her head held high, showing no fear. "Son," she called to Havoc, her voice steady, "you're making a mistake. This isn't about pride or territory. This is about right and wrong." Stand down before someone gets hurt. Before Havoc could respond, the sudden wail of police sirens cut through the tension. 3 patrol cars screamed into the parking lot, lights flashing. Chief Roberts, a Vietnam-era Marine, stepped out of the lead car, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "Nobody's fighting at my VA center," he announced. "Havoc, you and your boys need to leave. Now." The tension was palpable as Havoc looked from the police to the veterans' guard, then to Peggy. His face twisted with fury before he finally kicked his bike to life. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." As the Shadow Vipers withdrew, their reinforcements following, Iron Jack turned to Peggy. "He's right about one thing. This ISN." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting Riverstone in shades of gold and amber, the town seemed to hold its breath. The historic district, with its red brick buildings and cobblestone streets, stood as a testament to resilience, even as tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Inside the VA Center's conference room, Chief Roberts gathered his core team. The blinds were drawn, and the room was dimly lit by a single overhead lamp, its glow casting stark shadows across the faces of those seated around the table. A detailed map of Riverstone was spread out before them, marked with pins and annotations, each representing a location tied to the growing influence of the Shadow Vipers. Chief Roberts, a man with a rugged face that bore the lines of decades of service, spoke with a measured intensity. "Let me be direct," he began, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "The Shadow Vipers are not just causing random trouble. They've been systematically taking over this town. Protection rackets on 3rd Street. Intimidation of business owners in the historic district. And now, they're using fear to keep the whole town silent." Iron Jack, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose every movement spoke of discipline and experience, leaned forward, his sharp eyes scanning the map. "How many are we dealing with?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Core group is about 25, Roberts replied. "But after today's mess, Havoc's called in reinforcements. We're looking at 75 riders total, spread across 3 affiliated gangs. These aren't just thugs. They're organized and dangerous." Peggy Thompson, seated quietly to one side, studied the map with a thoughtful expression. Her years as a Vietnam pilot had given her a knack for spotting patterns and strategies. She pointed to the map, her finger tracing a route. "Look at this," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They've established control over every major route in and out of Riverstone. This isn't just about intimidation. They're consolidating power, making the town their stronghold." Chief Roberts nodded, his jaw tightening. "And that's not even the worst of it. We've got intel suggesting they're moving into drug trafficking, planning to use Riverstone as a distribution hub. If we don't stop them now, it'll only get worse." Iron Jack's fist clenched. "Not on my watch," he growled. "We're not letting this happen." Peggy raised a hand, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Easy, Jack," she said. "We need to be smarter than them, not just angrier. Chief, why hasn't the local police or city hall taken action yet?" Robert sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Politics," he said bitterly. "The mayor's office is terrified of escalating violence. And frankly, we've got reason to believe someone in City Hall is on their payroll." Meanwhile, across town in a dark, smoky warehouse that served as the Shadow Viper's base, Havoc paced like a caged animal. Reinforcements had arrived, hardened riders from allied gangs, their faces weathered and their eyes sharp. Around a battered table, they discussed their next move. A younger rider from one of the allied gangs spoke up hesitantly. "The Veterans Guard isn't like anyone we've faced before. They've got military training, discipline. They're not just a biker gang." Havoc slammed his fist on the table, his face twisted in rage. "I don't care who they are," he shouted. "This isn't just about territory anymore. This is personal. That old woman humiliated us in front of the whole town. If we back down now, we lose everything." "Diesel," one of Havoc's lieutenants, hesitated before speaking. Maybe we should think about moving to easier territory. This town's too hot now. Havoc's response was swift and violent. He shoved Diesel hard, sending him sprawling. If anyone here even thinks about running, you're out. We stay. We fight. And we show them what happens when someone crosses the Shadow Vipers. Back at the VA center, Peggy stood at the window, her gaze distant but determined. This isn't just about fighting a gang, she said quietly. This is about saving Riverstone's soul. I've lived here for 40 years. I've watched families grow. Kids play in the parks, businesses flourish. The Shadow Vipers aren't just threatening our safety. They're threatening everything this town stands for. Iron Jack nodded, his brow furrowed. So how do we fight them without turning this place into a war zone? Peggy turned back to the room, her expression resolute. With precision, intelligence, and strategy, we need to pick our battles carefully. They've spread themselves thin by trying to control everything. That makes them vulnerable. Chief Roberts leaned forward, intrigued. What's the plan? Peggy pointed to several marked locations on the map. We start by protecting the businesses they're extorting. Show the town that they're not alone. At the same time, we gather evidence of their drug operations. Evidence so damning that even City Hall can't ignore it. Sarah Chun, a former military intelligence officer, joined the discussion. And when the Shadow Vipers retaliate, she asked. They will, Peggy said calmly. That's what we're counting on. When people act out of anger, they make mistakes. We'll be ready for them. The room fell silent as the weight of the plan sank in. Iron Jack finally broke the silence. All right, Peggy, we'll do this your way, but I want you protected at all times. Havoc's not the type to let this go. Peggy smiled faintly. I've been through worse than Havoc, but I appreciate the concern. The meeting ended, and as the sun set over Riverstone, the Veterans Guard prepared to take their first stand. Across town, the Shadow Vipers plotted their next move. The battle for Riverstone was just beginning. But for the first time in months, the townspeople felt a glimmer of hope. The faint scent of smoke lingering from the fires the night before. People murmured anxiously, their voices a mix of anger and uncertainty. At the front of the room, Peggy Thompson stood with Iron Jack and Sarah Chin, a map of Riverstone spread across the table. The energy in the room was palpable. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a call to action. Peggy raised her hand, and the room fell silent. Her presence commanded respect, her years of experience evident in her steady gaze and calm demeanor. Last night, she began, her voice strong but tinged with emotion. Havoc and his gang tried to send us a message. They think they can intimidate us, break us, make us cower in fear. She paused, scanning the crowd. But look around. What I see isn't fear. It's strength, determination, community. They didn't break us. They only showed us how strong we can be when we stand together. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Tom Mason, his face still streaked with soot, stood and spoke. They burned my store, my family's legacy, but they didn't burn my will to fight. If anything, they lit a fire in me to stand up and say enough is enough. The crowd erupted in applause, and Peggy allowed a small smile before raising her hand to quiet them again. Havoc is counting on us to react emotionally, to lash out without a plan. That's what bullies do. They provoke and wait for us to make a mistake. But we're not going to give him that satisfaction. We're going to be smart, strategic, just like we were on 3rd Street. She gestured to Sarah, who stepped forward with a clipboard. We've identified key areas we need to protect. Businesses, homes, and community centers like this one. The Veterans Guard will continue their patrols, but we're asking for volunteers to join neighborhood watch groups. Every block, every street. Someone needs to be there to keep an eye out and report any suspicious activity. Hands shot up around the room. Business owners, retired veterans, even teenagers eager to help. Peggy nodded approvingly. Good. That's the first step. The second step is communication. Sarah and her team have set up a hotline. If you see or hear anything, you call. No matter how small it seems, it could be the piece of the puzzle we need. Iron Jack stepped forward, his voice gruff but steady. And for those of you who want to do more, we're organizing a training session tomorrow morning. Basic self-defense, situational awareness, and how to stay safe under pressure. We're not asking anyone to put themselves in harm's way, but knowledge is power, and we're going to make sure you have it. The room buzzed with renewed energy. People were no longer passive victims. They were becoming active participants in reclaiming their town. Peggy looked out at the crowd, her voice softening but losing none of its conviction. This is more than just a fight against a gang. This is about our town, our way of life. Havoc and his shadow vipers don't own Riverstone. We do. And together, we're going to show them what that means. The applause was thunderous, a wave of unity and resolve. As the meeting broke up, people lingered to talk, plan, and connect with their neighbors. The fires of the night before had left scars, but they had also sparked something far more powerful. A sense of solidarity that Havoc could never extinguish. Later that morning, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, Peggy and her core team gathered outside the community center. Iron Jack lit a cigar, his expression thoughtful. "You think they'll come again tonight?" he asked. Peggy nodded. "They will, but this time we'll be ready." Havoc made a mistake when he underestimated Riverstone. Now it's our turn to show him what real strength looks like. Sarah leaned against the hood of a car, her laptop open and a map of the town glowing on the screen. Intel suggests they're regrouping at the old warehouse on the edge of town. They're planning something big. "Let them plan," Peggy said, her eyes narrowing. "We've got plans of our own. This isn't just about defending our town anymore. It's about sending a message, one they won't forget." As the day wore on, Riverstone came alive with activity. Neighbors helped rebuild damaged businesses. Veterans taught self-defense classes in the park, and families brought food and supplies to those who had lost the most. The town wasn't just surviving, it was fighting back, and it was doing so together. By the time the sun set that evening, Riverstone wasn't just a town under siege. It was a town united, its spirit unbroken, and its resolve stronger than ever. And Peggy Thompson, with decades of experience and a heart full of determination, was leading the charge. Eerily out of sight, tracking the movements without engaging, Peggy leaned over the map of Riverstone, mentally calculating the cartel's next move. They weren't here for a show of force. They were laying groundwork for a takeover. "They're testing us," Peggy said, her voice calm but deliberate. "They want to see if we'll fold under the pressure of something bigger than a local gang." Iron Jack crossed his arms, his expression steely. "Then they're in for a rude awakening." Peggy pointed at the map. "We're not dealing with bikers anymore. This is organized crime, and they operate on efficiency and fear. They think they can steamroll us because they don't see the connections we've built." The veterans nodded in understanding. They'd faced worse in war zones, but the stakes felt heavier now. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting their home. In the warehouse, Havoc paced like a caged animal, the pressure of his crumbling empire bearing down on him. His lieutenants exchanged uneasy glances, none daring to voice their doubts. The cartel enforcers were nothing like the rough-and-tumble bikers. They were cold, disciplined, and utterly without mercy. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" Havoc snapped at his men. "This isn't just about Riverstone anymore. If we lose control, we're done." Snake Tattoo spoke hesitantly. "Boss, maybe we should pull back. Let things cool down." Havoc slammed his fist on the table. "Pull back? Do you know what happens if we back down now? We lose everything: respect, money, territory." The cartel leader, a man known only as El Jeef, entered the room, his presence instantly silencing the bikers. His calm demeanor was more intimidating than Havoc's rage. "This operation is becoming inefficient," El Jeef said, his voice low and measured. "You assured me the town was under control." "It will be," Havoc replied, his bravado faltering under the cartel leader's gaze. You have one chance to prove it, El Jeef said, turning to leave. Do not disappoint me. Back at the veterans' headquarters, the atmosphere was tense but determined. Peggy addressed the group, her tone unwavering. They'll try to escalate tonight. We know their patterns, and we know their weak points. This isn't just a fight. It's a test of who we are. Iron Jack stepped forward. We've prepared for this. Patrols are ready, and the townspeople are on alert. They're not just watching from the sidelines anymore. They're part of this. Peggy nodded. Good. Remember, we're not here to start a war, but if they bring one to us, we'll finish it. Night fell over Riverstone, and the tension reached its breaking point. The cartel's trucks regrouped, their presence a silent threat. But the veterans and townspeople had their own surprises. Surveillance cameras tracked every move, and barricades discreetly fortified key areas. When the first truck moved to block Main Street, a line of veterans appeared, their presence sending a clear message. This is our home. Havoc arrived moments later, flanked by his gang and the cartel enforcers. He looked at Peggy with a mix of hatred and begrudging respect. You've gone too far, lady, Havoc growled. You think you've won, but you don't know who you're dealing with. Peggy stepped forward unflinching. You're right, I don't. But I do know this. Riverstone isn't afraid of you anymore. El Jeef stepped into the light, his cold eyes scanning the scene. This is a waste of resources, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. End it. Before Havoc could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Dozens of police cars, backed by state and federal agents, converged on the scene. Chief Robert stepped out, a warrant in hand. Havoc, El Jeef, and anyone else involved, you're under arrest, the chief announced. The cartel's enforcers moved to resist, but veterans stepped forward, blocking their escape routes. The cartel might have been dangerous, but they weren't prepared for a united community backed by law enforcement. By dawn, the streets were quiet again. The cartel trucks were impounded, and Havoc's gang had been dismantled. El Jeef and his men were in federal custody, their empire crumbling under the weight of evidence collected by the veterans and police. Peggy stood in the center of town, watching as life began to return to normal. Businesses reopened, people smiled, and the air was filled with a sense of triumph. Iron Jack joined her, a rare smile on his face. We did it. Peggy nodded. No, they did it. The people of Riverstone, they found their strength. All we did was remind them it was there. Riverstone was no longer just a town. It was a symbol of resilience. And no matter what challenges came next, Peggy knew they would face them together. Peggy's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom as she addressed the group. The mercenaries want chaos, and Havoc thrives on it. But what they don't understand is that our greatest strength isn't in matching their firepower. It's in using their tactics against them. Iron Jack crossed his arms, concern etched on his face. So, what's the play, Peggy? She moved to the map on the wall, pointing to the marked positions of the mercenaries and the Shadow Vipers. We use their arrogance and overconfidence to our advantage. Every move they make leaves a trail. We exploit that. Sarah chimed in, pulling up more surveillance footage. They're sloppy with communications. We've intercepted fragments of their radio chatter. If we can pinpoint their main hub, we could learn their plans. Peggy nodded. Exactly. But we need to do more than listen. We need to dismantle them from the inside, divide their forces, sow confusion, and strike where they least expect. Tom Mason, still visibly shaken from his earlier encounter, hesitated before speaking. But how? These aren't just gang members anymore. They've got resources we can't match. Peggy gave him a reassuring look. We've got something they don't, Tom. Community. They think they're fighting a divided town. Let's show them what it means to be united. The plan unfolds. Over the next 48 hours, Peggy and the Veterans Guard execute a series of covert operations designed to cripple Havoc's forces. Surveillance drones, courtesy of a local tech enthusiast, monitored the mercenaries' movements. Small teams infiltrated cartel supply lines, sabotaging shipments without being detected. False leads were planted to keep the mercenaries and shadow vipers chasing shadows. Peggy coordinated everything from the Veterans Guard Command Center, her experience in Vietnam guiding every decision. She worked tirelessly, her mind sharp despite the late nights. The community rallied behind her, proving that Riverstone's spirit was stronger than ever. The turning point. At dawn on the third day, a critical breakthrough came. Sarah decrypted a heavily encrypted message from the cartel. The mercenaries had a primary target, Veterans Guard headquarters. Havoc and his allies were planning a full-scale assault. Peggy wasted no time. She gathered her team, laying out the plan with the precision of a seasoned commander. They're coming for us, but we won't be here waiting. We'll meet them on our terms. Iron Jack grinned, his confidence unwavering. They won't know what hit them. The ambush. When the convoy of mercenaries and shadow vipers reached the outskirts of the factory, they found it eerily quiet. The usual activity was gone, replaced by an unsettling silence. As they advanced, they triggered hidden smoke bombs, plunging the area into chaos. From the shadows, Veterans Guard members struck with calculated precision, using non-lethal methods wherever possible. They disarmed the mercenaries and disrupted their communication lines. Havoc, caught in the middle of the chaos, barked orders that went unheard amid the confusion. Peggy observed from a concealed vantage point, ensuring the operation went according to plan. Stay focused, she reminded her team over the radio. We're not just fighting for today, we're fighting for the future of Riverstone. Victory and aftermath. By the time the smoke cleared, Havoc and his remaining allies were surrounded. The mercenaries, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, surrendered to avoid further losses. Chief Roberts, having been kept informed throughout the operation, arrived with reinforcements to take the arrested parties into custody. The cartel's operations in Riverstone were dismantled, their influence shattered. The evidence collected by the Veterans Guard was so thorough that federal authorities launched a broader investigation, taking down the entire network. Peggy stood in the center of the factory, now bustling with activity once again. The community she had fought so hard to protect was stronger than ever. Iron Jack approached, his voice filled with pride. We did it, Peggy. They came for us, and we stood our ground. Peggy smiled, her gaze sweeping over the people of Riverstone. We didn't just stand our ground, Jack. We proved that when a community comes together, there's no force on earth that can break it. Riverstone had weathered the storm, emerging not just intact but unshakable. The lessons learned and the bonds formed would ensure its resilience for generations to come. Peggy signaled subtly to the disguised veterans scattered throughout the diner. They understood the unspoken message and began preparing for the final phase of their operation. The tension in the air was palpable as the clock ticked down. Peggy sat motionless, her fingers brushing the rim of her coffee cup, eyes focused on the street outside. She wasn't leaving. Iron Jack's voice came through the hidden earpiece. All units in position. Civilians are clear. Ready on your signal. Peggy responded quietly. Hold until they make their move. We need every piece of evidence locked down before the hammer falls. At the mercenary base, Marshall regrouped with his teams. We move in precisely 1 hour. Full sweep. No witnesses. His men nodded in grim unison, checking their gear and weapons. Havoc, listening in, smirked with satisfaction. Finally, the woman who'd humiliated him would be silenced. Back at the diner, Peggy finished her coffee, stood, and left. Her movements were deliberate, as though she hadn't a care in the world. Yet each step carried the weight of decades of battle experience. The shadows deepened as night fully claimed Riverstone, and the town became unervingly quiet. Inside their fortified positions, the veterans prepared for what was coming. Iron Jack checked the charges they'd planted at key choke points, ensuring they could disable vehicles and cut off escape routes if needed. Sarah monitored the surveillance feeds, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she cataloged every face, every vehicle, every weapon. "They're starting to move," she whispered into the comms. Marshals' teams began converging on Peggy's house, unaware that every step they took was being tracked and logged. The mercenaries moved with military precision, their training evident in their synchronized movements. In the distance, Havoc's men waited for their moment to strike, eager to watch the veterans be overrun. Peggy arrived at her home, her porch light casting a soft glow. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, leaving the front window curtains slightly ajar, a deliberate invitation. She sat in her living room, the same calm expression on her face, her hands resting on the armrest of her chair. There in position, Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. "Snipers have a line of sight. Ground teams are closing in." "Not yet," Peggy murmured. She needed them to fully commit, to step into the trap. The first shot shattered the window, narrowly missing Peggy as she dove behind the couch. The mercenaries moved in, their approach swift and confident. At that exact moment, Iron Jack's voice rang out through the comms. "Now!" Explosions rocked the night, disabling the vehicles that had been their escape routes. Floodlights blazed alive, illuminating the mercenaries and cartel members in sharp relief. The veterans' guard sprang into action, their hidden positions becoming fortified strongholds. Marshall barked orders, trying to regain control of his men. "Regroup, find cover." But it was too late. The veterans had outmaneuvered them. Peggy's voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "You came to my town thinking you could bully us, but you underestimated what people fighting for their home can do. Surrender now, or we release everything we've recorded, every deal, every face, every crime, to federal authorities." The mercenaries hesitated. They were professionals, not zealots, and this was becoming a losing battle. Havoc, watching from his warehouse, screamed into his radio, "Don't you dare back down. Finish this." Marshall looked around at his trapped and cornered men, then back at the illuminated house where Peggy stood, her silhouette visible through the shattered window. He made his decision. "Stand down," he ordered through clenched teeth. "All units, stand down." The cartel members, furious at the sudden betrayal, tried to fight back, but were swiftly overwhelmed. Havoc, realizing his forces were crumbling, attempted to flee, only to find Iron Jack and two veterans blocking his path. "Going somewhere?" Iron Jack growled. Havoc raised his hands, his bravado evaporating. By dawn, it was over. The mercenaries had been detained, the cartel members arrested, and Havoc himself was in custody. The evidence Sarah had meticulously collected was handed over to federal authorities, ensuring the entire network would be dismantled. Peggy stood on her porch, looking out over her town as the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon. Iron Jack joined her, a tired but satisfied smile on his face. "You really like springing traps, don't you?" he said. She chuckled softly. "Sometimes it's the only way to make sure the right people get caught." Riverstone was safe, for now. The scars of the battle would linger, but so would the resolve of its people. Peggy knew there would always be threats, but as long as she and the Veterans Guard stood watch, the town's soul would remain unbroken. The Shadow Vipers didn't. Riverstone. She wasn't aiming to outrun them. She was aiming to outthink them. The Veterans Guard split into teams, setting up makeshift barricades and roadblocks to funnel the convoy toward predetermined choke points. Peggy's voice crackled over their radios, directing the coordinated effort. "Remember, we're dealing with explosives. We stopped the vehicles without triggering anything. Precision, not force." Havoc, with his manic focus, didn't realize the trap tightening around him. His convoy roared through the night, scattering debris as they barreled toward downtown. Peggy drove parallel to them, her earpiece crackling with updates from Sarah and Iron Jack. Every turn Havoc took brought him closer to the veterans' ambush. Finally, the convoy reached a narrow street where barricades loomed ahead. The van screeched to a halt as Shadow Vipers leapt off their bikes, guns drawn, trying to figure out their next move. From hidden vantage points, the veterans' guard moved into position, rifles trained in commands ready to neutralize threats surgically. Havoc stepped out of his van, clutching a detonator in one hand. His voice boomed across the standoff. "You think you've won, Peggy? One press of this button, and everything you love turns to ash." Peggy emerged from the shadows, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Havoc, look around. Do you think you're the first man to threaten me with destruction? I've faced dictators, warlords, and insurgents. None of them stood a chance against unity, strategy, and courage." Havoc's grin faltered for the first time. He looked to his men, some of whom were beginning to lower their weapons, unnerved by Peggy's unflinching gaze. "You think your little speeches scare me," he shouted. "I'll take all of you with me." "Maybe you would," Peggy replied, her voice sharp as steel, "if the detonator weren't a decoy." For a moment, Havoc's bravado evaporated. His eyes flicked to the device in his hand, doubt creeping into his expression. Before he could react, a deafening crack shattered the air, a perfectly timed shot from a sniper among the veterans' guard. The detonator flew from Havoc's grasp, landing harmlessly in the dirt. In the chaos that followed, the Shadow Vipers scrambled to flee, but their retreat was swiftly blocked. Veterans on motorcycles cornered them, disarming those who resisted and securing the explosives. Havoc lunged for his bike in a last-ditch effort to escape, but Peggy stepped into his path. "You can't win this," she said, her voice low and resolute. "You think you're better than me?" Havoc snarled. "You think you're untouchable?" "No," Peggy replied, "but I fight for something bigger than myself. That's the difference between us." With one final surge of anger, Havoc swung at Peggy, but she sidestepped effortlessly. Iron Jack appeared behind him, delivering a swift blow that sent the defeated leader to the ground. Havoc groaned, his strength drained along with his delusions of control. As the first rays of dawn illuminated the scene, federal agents moved in to take custody of Havoc and his gang. The explosives were carefully dismantled under the watchful eyes of bomb specialists, and the Shadow Viper's reign of terror came to a decisive end. Peggy leaned against her car, watching the cleanup with a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Sarah approached, a smile breaking through her worry. "Looks like we won," she said. "For now," Peggy replied. "But it's not just about winning. It's about making sure they don't come back." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of Peggy's words. Riverstone had been spared, but the battle against greed, violence, and corruption was far from over. Still, in that moment, there was a sense of triumph, not just for the town, but for the principles they had defended. As the last of the gang members were loaded into police vans, Peggy turned to Iron Jack and the other veterans. "Good work," she said simply. They nodded in return, their camaraderie forged in shared purpose. Riverstone would heal, but it would never forget the night its people stood together to protect their home. And at the heart of it all, Peggy Thompson had proven once again that true strength came not from force but from unity, strategy, and the courage to stand firm in the face of darkness. The night shadows in Riverstone thickened as tension gripped the town. Peggy, seated in her usual booth at Diana's diner, remained outwardly calm, her pen poised above a crossword puzzle that she hadn't touched in minutes. Across town, Marshall's voice echoed through his command vehicle, his tactical display counting down the final minutes before action. His mercenaries were in position, their weapons ready, their target marked. Yet, something gnawed at Marshall, a sense that things weren't as they seemed. Riverstone streets were quieter than they should have been, the veterans' movements too deliberate to be careless. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. At the Shadow Viper's warehouse, Havoc's frustration boiled over as cartel representatives grew impatient. They questioned his obsession with Peggy, dismissing it as a costly distraction. Havoc's retort was sharp, his anger masking a growing desperation. He couldn't let Peggy's defiance stand. His reputation depended on breaking her. As the clock struck 0, chaos erupted. Suddenly, every light in Riverstone went dark. Moments later, Powerful spotlights illuminated the mercenaries' sniper nests and surveillance points, exposing their positions with unerring accuracy. Marshall barked orders, but his forces were already crumbling. The veterans' guard, far from retreating, had merely repositioned. Now they emerged from shadows, their coordination a testament to meticulous planning. Inside the diner, Peggy set down her pen and stood. Through her concealed earpiece, Sarah's voice confirmed the DEA's readiness. Peggy turned to Diana, who nodded. The diner's patrons revealed themselves as Veterans Guard members, securing the building with practiced efficiency. Peggy spoke into a radio, her voice calm and steady. "Marshall, let's discuss professional courtesy." Marshall gritted his teeth as Peggy's words crackled over his radio. He knew then that they'd been outmaneuvered. Every move they'd made, every step, had been anticipated. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, panic set in. Cartel members tried to flee, but found their escape routes blocked by federal agents. Havoc, watching the chaos unfold, refused to accept defeat. His laughter, tinged with madness, echoed through the room as he stormed into a locked storage room. Inside, a stockpile of explosives gleamed ominously under fluorescent lights. "If I can't have Riverstone, neither can she," he snarled. Peggy, hearing the reports of Havoc's movements, acted decisively. "Havoc's gone rogue," she informed her team. "He's got enough explosives to destroy half the town. We need to stop him now." The Veterans Guard mobilized, their bikes roaring to life as they pursued Havoc's convoy through Riverstone streets. Federal agents worked to evacuate potential targets, while Havoc's taunts crackled over intercepted radio frequencies. Peggy, calm as ever, directed her team to funnel Havoc's vehicles toward a construction site on Maple Street, a dead end surrounded by concrete barriers. The convoy sped into the trap, their escape blocked by Veterans Guard bikes. Havoc leaped from his bike, clutching a detonator. "Back off, or I'll take us all out," he shouted. Peggy stepped out of her car, her movements slow and deliberate. "Is this what you wanted, Havoc?" she asked, her voice firm yet compassionate. "To prove you're dangerous? Congratulations. But this isn't strength. Real strength is about protecting others, not destroying them." For a moment, doubt flickered in Havoc's eyes, but his finger tightened on the detonator. Before he could press it, a gunshot rang out. Diesel, Havoc's oldest friend, had made his choice. The bullet struck Havoc's hand, sending the detonator flying. Federal agents swarmed the site, securing the explosives and arresting the remaining Shadow Vipers. Havoc's reign of terror had ended, not with an explosion, but with the quiet surrender of a broken man. In the aftermath, Riverstone began to heal. Former gang members who'd walked away from Havoc's madness found themselves working alongside Veterans Guard members to repair the damage. At the diner, Peggy watched the transformation with a mixture of relief and hope. Sarah reported that Marshall's mercenaries were being transferred to federal custody. Surprisingly, Marshall requested a meeting with Peggy. Handcuffed in a secure room, Marshall acknowledged Peggy's brilliance. "You outmaneuvered us completely," he admitted. "When I get out, I'd like to work for you. The Veterans Guard could use someone with my expertise." Peggy studied him, seeing a glimmer of potential. "We fight for community, not power or money," she said. "If you understand that, there might be a place for you on Riverstone streets." Change was taking root. Former Shadow Vipers joined community projects, their efforts a symbol of redemption. At the VA Center, Sarah launched a mentorship program for ex-gang members, pairing them with veterans who'd faced their own battles. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the greatest victory is helping people find their conscience. That evening, Peggy sat on her porch, watching the sunset. Iron Jack joined her, his admiration clear. "You planned all of this, didn't you?" he asked. Peggy smiled faintly. "Not everything," she replied. "I just gave people a chance to see a better way. Sometimes, that's all it takes." Peggy Thompson sat quietly, her eyes tracing the familiar patterns of Riverstone streets as they bustled with morning life. A year had passed since the town had faced its darkest hour, and yet the memories felt as vivid as the sunlight streaming through the diner's window. At 91, Peggy had seen more battles than most could imagine, but none had been as transformative as the one that had unfolded here. James, formerly known as Snake Tattoo, entered Diana's diner with a confident stride. His leather vest still bore the faint traces of the Shadow Viper's insignia, now overshadowed by a bold new patch, Veterans Guard Civilian Auxiliary. The man who had once terrorized the streets of Riverstone now worked to protect them. "Morning, Miss Peggy," he greeted, sliding into the booth across from her. "Got 3 more former gang members starting the mentorship program next week. Word spreading to other towns. People want to know how Riverstone did it." Peggy smiled warmly. "It's simple, James. We gave them a chance. That's all anyone ever really needs." Through the diner's window, the signs of transformation were unmistakable. Tom Mason's hardware store, once a target of vandalism, now flourished under the joint management of Tom and 2 reformed Vipers. Diana's diner itself had become a hub for community gatherings, where veterans and former gang members shared stories over cups of coffee and hearty meals. Iron Jack entered next, his rugged frame towering as he approached the booth. He set a steaming cup of coffee before Peggy. Marshall's getting an early release for cooperation. He still wants to join up when he's out. "Good," Peggy replied with a nod. "We'll need men who understand both sides of the line." Sarah Chen arrived moments later, her arms laden with a stack of papers. Her energy seemed endless, even as she placed the documents on the table. "The government's interested in our rehabilitation program. They want to use Riverstone as a model for other communities." Peggy's gaze remained steady. "Tell them it's not about programs. It's about believing people can change if you give them the chance." Outside, motorcycles roared down the street, not in defiance but as a symbol of unity. Veterans Guard members rode alongside former Shadow Vipers, their destination the old warehouse district now under renovation. Affordable housing and small businesses were taking root in a space once dominated by fear and despair. Iron Jack leaned back, watching the riders pass. "Remember when this all started? One phone call. That's all it took." Peggy's lips curled into a soft smile. It was never just about the call, Jack. It was about showing people a different kind of strength. The afternoon brought a gathering in the town square. A new memorial stood tall, its inscription simple yet profound. Strength through unity. Peace through understanding. The ceremony drew a crowd that reflected the very essence of Riverstone's transformation. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with former gang members, business owners, and families. Each face in the crowd told a story of redemption, resilience, and hope. As Peggy approached the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. A year ago, Riverstone stood at a crossroads. We could have chosen vengeance. We could have fought fire with fire. Instead, we chose something harder. We chose to believe in the power of change. Her words lingered in the air, carried by the quiet breeze. Behind her, the memorial stood as a testament to the town's journey. The transformation had not been easy, but it had been profound. It was a victory not of fists or weapons, but of courage, compassion, and the willingness to see the humanity in others. From the edge of the crowd, a lone motorcycle approached. Its rider, Havoc's younger brother, removed his helmet as he dismounted. His presence was a stark reminder of the past, but also of the promise of a new future. He had written to Peggy from prison, asking if Riverstone's second chances extended to family. Her response had been simple: "Come home. We'll help you find your way." As the ceremony concluded, the crowd dispersed, yet the sense of unity lingered. Peggy returned to her porch that evening, the golden hues of sunset casting long shadows across the town. Iron Jack joined her, his voice contemplative. "When you made that first call, I thought we were just going to run some troublemakers out of town." Peggy's laughter was soft but genuine. "So did I. But sometimes the best victories are the ones you never planned for." The sound of children's laughter echoed down the street. A group of kids rode bicycles, followed by a Veterans Guard escort. It wasn't for protection anymore, but a symbol of the bond that now held the town together. They're calling it the Riverstone Miracle, Sarah mentioned as she joined them. But it wasn't really a miracle, was it? No, Peggy replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. It was just people discovering their better selves. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can. As night fell, lights illuminated the streets of Riverstone. The town buzzed with life, its people connected by a shared journey of redemption and renewal. The darkness that had once threatened to consume the town now served only as a backdrop to its light. And amidst it all, Peggy Thompson sat quietly, knowing that the greatest battles are not those fought against others, but those fought for them. This had been the true victory in Riverstone, not in defeating an enemy, but in transforming one. It was a triumph of love, courage, and the unwavering belief in the power of change. In the end, that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more incredible moments, don't forget to hit the like button. Share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more epic stories. Your support means a lot, and we can't wait to bring you more thrilling content. Stay tuned.